Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media's look at provincial politics in Saskatchewan. I am Murray Mandryk, political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. Joining me, as always, Arthur White-Crummey, our legislative reporter for the Leader Post and Saskatoon Star Phoenix. And thank you for joining us, our special guest, Lisa Schick, senior reporter with CJME Rolco Radio in Saskatchewan, who's despite her very young age, has covered the legislature forever. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Don't get any older. Arthur, let's start out with the news of yesterday and today being Premier Scott Moe's concern that his alternate plan for a federal carbon tax in the wake of the Supreme Court decision has been rejected. Can you explain why the Premier's plan was rejected and why he seems so sad about it?
Yeah, he certainly does seem a bit perturbed, which is not really surprising because this saga has been going on for quite some time, as I'm sure we're all aware. But after the Premier's long crusade to challenge the constitutionality of the federal carbon pricing framework, which we know failed at the Supreme Court, soon after that, he announced that he was going to roll out a made in Saskatchewan carbon tax plan and then submit it to Ottawa for approval. That happened in May. It actually went to the Federal Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, but we just learned this week that was rejected, the proposal that Saskatchewan made. And the reason is because Ottawa is coming up with a new, more stringent benchmark. So the way that the carbon tax works, from Ottawa's perspective, is they set a benchmark, a threshold that all provinces have to meet if they make their own plan. If they don't meet it, then Ottawa's own carbon tax system, called the backstop, snaps into place. That's been true in Saskatchewan for several years now, but the benchmark is going to get stricter. So any provincial plan to replace it has to be a little bit more ambitious. Ottawa doesn't want to consider any new carbon pricing systems from the provinces until that benchmark is in place. It's coming into place in 2023, which means that Saskatchewan and any other province that wants to come up with a new plan has to wait at least a year and a half before they actually submit it and get it approved. Scott Moe, as soon as he heard about this, called it a political decision, an arbitrary decision. He said that his plan would have been much better for Saskatchewan families and jobs, which is kind of a little bit strange because when you look at the details of the plan itself, it's not really that different from the federal plan. Basically, it uses the same fuel charge with the same amount of escalation year by year in the price. It basically just extends an existing system that's used for industry to power generation and to natural gas distribution, which is kind of what Ottawa's system already does with a few minor differences. So what's happening here on a practical level for Saskatchewan people isn't really that significant. But on a political level, it's very significant because it allows the Premier to continue one of his favorite fights with Ottawa.
And that's truly the case. Lisa, politics is never too far away from this particular issue. What is the NDP opposition saying about that aspect of it, and how much of it sort of does apply to the reality that this has been an ongoing fight, and it's pretty hard to ignore the reality that there's a federal election in the offing, that there's a pretty close connection to the federal Conservatives and the provincial Sask Party. What is the NDP saying about the relative politics of it in terms of what we're seeing right now?
Well, Ryan Miley's been saying for a long time that, if Scott Moe and the Sask Party had just figured out a plan that worked with the federal regulations, then we wouldn't be under the federal carbon tax, something, made in Saskatchewan. But earlier this week, he really came out swinging, saying that Moe kind of wanted this to happen, that he really likes being able to fight with Ottawa, being able to kind of make Justin Trudeau the bad guy and stuff like this. And he kind of wanted things to happen because that's one of his favorite things to do, according to Ryan Miley.
And that's been the case in terms of sort of some of the rhetoric that we hear in any kind of policy discussion like this, that quickly gets into the area of partisanship in some ways or the other. It's kind of funny almost to hear that again after sort of months of COVID-19, when it was a lot harder for politicians to get into the whole notion of a partisanship nature of this. However, now we're looking at a situation where we see basically an opening up of restrictions, an opening up of being able to go out and do things. And I think there probably is going to be an added political element in terms of how the decision making in those particular areas is being assessed. But Arthur, let's start with you and on the how well the opening up file is going, because I see that you've been partying hard in terms of with the opening, all part of your job. You know, let's be straight here. You're a dedicated reporter. 1 a.m, going to the bars, checking out things. Is it working so far? And do we see something right now in terms of a new attitude in Saskatchewan that actually, from a political standpoint, might be very helpful to Scott Moe, in the sense that it's more in line with the direction he's chosen? How's it going so far, and what did you find out at Gabos?
So I was there before 1 a.m, Murray. We got into line at 12:45 to ensure that we were in there, because the line grew very quickly at Gabos nightclub. And for those that don't know, and I know that Murray does know, because he's got some family connections there, people that love to party. But this particular nightclub is very popular with the local youth of Regina, and it's a dance club, so it gets pretty crazy sometimes. People are there partying to all hours of the night. And it's felt like it went right back to normal at 12:01 a.m. on Sunday, when all of the restrictions came off the table. And it really did feel like COVID never happened. People were dancing cheek to jowl. They were sharing cigarettes. They were making out in the smoking area. And a few people there were telling me COVID is over. They are never going to be able to bring back any of these restrictions, and we are going to party forever. But others were a bit more responsible. They said, we're only able to be here because people are getting vaccinated. They were a bit worried by some of the low vaccination rates. And some of these kids were encouraging people. Like they said, I've got my vaccination. That's why I'm here. I feel safer being here because I'm vaccinated. And I encourage others to do so that we, as the youth of Regina and all of Saskatchewan, can continue to party hard.
Well, it is kind of funny because people are so judgy about these kids, forgetting that, they're 19-year-old kids, they're 20-year-old people, they're young adults, and this is kind of, I have a big recollection of doing something similar back in the 80s. Have I ever told you about the 80s, Arthur? One of these days I'll talk about the 80s. You'll have to pry it out of me. But
sure.
Sure.
You mean the 1880s or the 1980s?
Both, actually. But when you're my age, you get to experience both. It's a silly thing to think that kids aren't going to go out and party hard. It's silly to think that they are going to not be able to, or not want to be able to go out and do the things they did because they're kids. But is it, from your observations, from what you've seen so far, is it really that bad? I'm old. I only wander into Safeway, and generally speaking, I still see people wearing masks and things like that. What is your sense, and this is obviously just anecdotally, but what is your sense in terms of the public reaction been to mask wearing?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same sense as you, that it's people are treating this with a degree of caution. I've seen the odd person here and there not wearing a mask in the Shoppers Drug Mart. But I think people are going to take this slowly, and there's still a certain amount of caution out there. That was, of course, not true at Gabo's, like I've previously explained. But I mean, we have to understand that these kids have been making sacrifices for months and months and months in order to protect those who are at a much higher risk of getting serious complications from COVID. At this point, anyone who wants a vaccine can get a vaccine. So to me, it feels fair for these kids to want to get out and live their life because those who are able to protect themselves can fully do so.
I do not know any youth of Saskatchewan that have made a greater sacrifice than Lisa Schick, and here's why. Lisa Schick has probably attended almost every one of the Premier's press conferences, the last one of which was last Wednesday. You probably haven't missed very many from what I've seen of the calls. I've missed a few.
Really?
Yeah, the leader post Star Phoenix guys have optioned on and off sometimes, but you've always been there. You had your last one last Wednesday, and what you heard from that, not mission accomplished, but just did seem to be a sense, and I think I wrote this, that the mission was over for Scott Moe. Was his words very deliberate and careful in that regard? And what kind of room do you think he left himself should we have an outbreak, further outbreak of the variants that we're talking about and concern in that particular area?
Yeah, like he did actually say there is no mission accomplished banner behind me, but it did feel like that, like, these things are ending, we need to continue, we need to move on. He did say that we are still going to have new cases. There are still going to be outbreaks, but there is a point at which we need to continue on here. And it was kind of a balancing act, and I thought it was very well encapsulated by, at the end, he shook Dr. Shahab's hand. He said, last spring, I said that I wanted to be able to do this when everything is over. And they shook hands, but then Dr. Shahab quickly, reminded him that he needed to sanitize his hands right after.
That was an amazing gesture, and I was a little surprised because you could see it coming, and you could sort of see him doing it for, I think, the reasons that were related to wanting to send a message. But to me, when I wasn't there live, but when I saw it on TV, yeah, kind of felt like COVID all of a sudden was really over because people were physically contacting themselves again, as per the leadership of the province. Was that kind of the intent there? And what might be the consequences with new variants and others coming in right now, and maybe the vaccination rates that we'll get into in a moment?
There were a couple of questions that were asked about, like, is this really a good time to be doing this? We have Delta variants coming in. Some of the other countries that they talked about at the beginning of this plan have slowed themselves down. But, Dr. Shahab was very much like, we have to do this at some point. This is the safest time. This is the best time for us to do this, looking at how numbers are right now. Pardon me. And this is how it's going to go. And he again did say we are going to have cases, we are going to have more outbreaks, and it just seems like they're ready to deal with what comes. And I did ask Dr. Shahab, at what point could we see more restrictions come back in? What has to happen for that to happen? And he said he doesn't know if wide restrictions like we've already seen will ever come back in, because he doesn't know if it would actually do anything with 70% and more of people vaccinated. So he kind of said it would be more targeted, such as restrictions specifically for people who aren't vaccinated.
Let's talk about that for a moment, Arthur, because two things, one of which is the Premier said that he's not going to have vaccine passports. We talked about that in this podcast before. But let's take a little bit deeper dive, if we can, into who has the vaccine right now, who has second doses, and I guess what the Saskatchewan Health Authority would really have to do to see a dramatic increase in numbers. I noticed yesterday, for the first time in a little while, there was a dramatic decline in the number of vaccines that were doled out by the province. Is this a trend that we can now expect? And where are we at in terms of different age groups related to vaccines and how serious a concern is, particularly among the age group that you're talking about, because it is the 18 to 29-year-olds. They're probably out there partying. They're doing a little bit better, but maybe not as well as they possibly could be in terms of first doses.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to make a judgment or see a trend line from any one day, because a lot of this depends on the vaccine delivery schedule. So sometimes there's a big surge because we just get a shipment of vaccines from Ottawa. But generally speaking, you're right. The younger age groups have been trailing the older ones. Part of this is, undoubtedly just because they started later, but clearly, we are starting to see a little bit of a plateau in first doses and have been for several weeks now. There's probably several factors at work here. I mean, we hear from experts that there are issues with accessibility in some areas, but kids of that age do just feel a little bit more invulnerable to the virus. I mean, certainly I think that people's concern over COVID-19 is proportional to their age, just because we know from the statistics that you're more likely to be hospitalized and die the older you are, with a lot of caveats about chronic illnesses and comorbidities. So I don't think that's surprising. I think that the way to tackle it is just to continue with public education, to continue with bringing the vaccine to places where kids are, right? And by kids, I mean people in their late teens, early 20s as well. Maybe, Murray, it's time to bring the vaccine to Gabos. You can have. I
thought about that. I thought that would be brilliant. Yes.
You can have the SHA set up right on the dance floor, right? Or in the smoking area. And,
that's right.
And if somebody wants to have a smoke, they should have to get a vaccine first. I think that would be a really, really strong incentive. I'm not sure how that would work for the SHA ethically. They probably don't want to promote smoking. But hey, these are desperate times, and desperate times call for desperate measures.
That's right. Lisa, you've done a lot of work in this particular area, and it isn't just the kids. And you've asked questions about this in terms of various demographics, various groups that aren't getting vaccinated. Where do you think the government sees the big challenges right now? The SHA sees the big challenges in getting people vaccinated beyond the specific age group Arthur was just mentioning.
Well, a lot of what they're looking at, and a lot of I guess if you look at the numbers, the lower vaccination rates tend to be in more rural areas, so not Regina and Saskatchewan, and especially in the far north. And they've been talking about, education campaigns, trying to get more accessibility, more availability, I guess, for those vaccine clinics. And I know, for example, the Hatchet Lake Dene Nation up north, they've been dealing with a pretty bad outbreak. And when I talked to some people up there, they were talking about, they were doing a door-to-door vaccination campaign, like literally going door to door and saying, hey, do you have any questions? Maybe we can get you a vaccination if you don't already have one. So it's going to have to be a lot of things like that. And things are slowing down. I mean, like you said, the numbers really are slowing down. They have been for a while. And so it's going to need more of a push and more of that if they're going to keep those vaccinations going.
It's going to be a long time before we see the results of these decisions, or perhaps not a long time, but the consequences tend to trail whatever decisions made in terms of reopening plan. We have a big one coming up, so in 2-3 weeks, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in terms of the number of cases, what demographics are getting COVID, and what the end result is. Fortunately, we don't have much more time to get into that today. So I very much thank you, Arthur, as usual, and you, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us. It was fun. I'll see you at Gabos. Actually, I will not. They have age restrictions, I believe, don't they, Arthur?
I mean, I don't think there's any firm age restriction, Murray, but it may be advisable to follow one. Although I did see a few older gentlemen there. I'm not sure exactly what their motivation was.
Not this old, baby. Not this old. Anyway, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us, and take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Murray.